Hello, beautiful alchemist. Welcome to Reiki Radio. I am your host, Yolanda, and this is our final episode of 2022. And I am very excited that we are ending off this season of Reiki Radio with focus on Reiki itself. I thoroughly enjoy the opportunity to have so many discussions within the realm of spirituality, and that we all get to gather this way to learn, to grow, to exchange, to share these beautiful stories. And, during the pandemic, there was a period of time where I didn't podcast. I took quite a bit of a break. And then right after that, I had the opportunity to host the Reiki Rays Global Healing Summit, which was amazing. But of course, doing all of those interviews, I still couldn't come back to Reiki Radio. So I'm so thankful for season 9. We got to have some beautiful discussions, again, learning from some beautiful healers and teachers and authors. And I hope that you have enjoyed this journey. So today, for the final episode, we're actually going to have a conversation with Bruce Taylor, who is a Reiki and wellness teacher that I was able to interview during the summit. And the conversation we had today was prompted by an upcoming pilgrimage to Kyoto, Japan, which will happen in May of 2023. So Bruce Taylor and his teacher, Inamoto Sensei, who I also interviewed in the summit, they will be hosting a retreat to Kyoto, Japan, May 1st through 7th. And we will talk about that, giving you more details. However, we have an in-depth conversation about the journey throughout the practice of Reiki overall. And I really have enjoyed these conversations with Bruce because, as you will find, the practice of Reiki and meditation and other systems as well has been a beautiful gift in expanding both of us in consciousness on our journeys, on our paths. And I'm sure that you will relate to so much of what he shares and what comes up in the discussion. And it may even help to clarify for you what the process is like going deeper into your practice, because there are some elements that we experience through the application of Reiki techniques or techniques within the system of Reiki that aren't necessarily covered in class, or you won't necessarily fully hear about in any book. But again, we gather this way to have these conversations so that we all gain deeper understanding and insight. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation. His point of focus, especially for the retreat or the journey to Japan, is to point the arrow at the legacy of Yusui Sensei. So whether you're already a practitioner of Reiki or just curious, again, I'm sure you will enjoy this conversation. I will see you on the other side. Okay, everyone, welcome to another episode of Reiki Radio. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with a new friend of mine, Bruce Taylor. Bruce is a Reiki master teacher, and if you were part of the Reiki Race Healing Summit, you would have seen our conversation there together, as well as the interview with Bruce's teacher, Inamoto Sensei. So I want to thank you, Bruce, for coming to talk with all of us today, and I'm excited about our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful to be here and to talk with you again, Yolanda, and I'm very excited about this. Indeed. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Oh, no, it's always a pleasure. I mean, our conversation last time was such a joy. And afterward, I was thinking, wow, I could have asked him so many things. But we are going to talk today a bit about searching for the legacy of Yusui Sensei in an upcoming trip to Japan, which will be in 2023. So before we get into that, though, for people who may not know your personal background and how you came into connection with Reiki itself, could you give us a little bit about how you went from teaching even and coming into this particular spiritual practice.
Yeah, indeed. So people can watch this recorded as well, right on my site at rootsoflife.org. But I'll give that similar story here. Reiki has always been, or what you and I and all the listeners now know to be Reiki, that thing has always been with me. I've got a very sensitive connection to my body,
Mm,
right? For better or worse, mind you. It's not always rosy, right?
right,
But I remember as a little boy, there was this thing that I could feel, and I remember I could make my knees just by putting my hands on my knees and just focusing on them. I could make them feel really good, and I didn't know what it was, and I just would say like, "Yeah, it just tickles. It feels amazing." I didn't know what that was. Um, but then, of course, why wouldn't I stay with that? And so I kept trying to explore it, and I know that to feel it, I would need to be quiet. So I'd have to sit and kind of do what I now know is like seated meditation. And that just continued to build, and it brought me into a lot of different, kind of holistic and spiritual tangents like yoga and mindfulness and spirituality and all that type of stuff. And my main archetype, if you will, is a teacher. My secondary archetype, I think, is a healer, so the main thing that I was always kind of drawn to was to teach, and that brought me into secondary education, focusing on astronomy, physical sciences, and human sciences like economics and philosophy and so on. And the abridged version of it is that got me to Hong Kong teaching. I was teaching outside of Chicago. I'm from the south side of the city, and yeah, I ended up somehow through a long convoluted journey. I got to Hong Kong, and there the teaching environment started to get really stressful. And this is why I'm saying the sensitivity to my body is a blessing and a curse, right? There was a lot of stress with a lot of pressure with teaching, beautiful kids, but a pressure cooker environment. And my health started to suffer. I started to get like high blood pressure, started to put on a lot of weight, a lot of stress, really just not in good shape. And thankfully, that sensitivity kept kind of urging me, like, I've got to go check something out. I've got to check something out.
mm,
And the straw that broke the back was a diagnosis of testicular cancer, from all the stress and from all of the turmoil and everything. And that was the blessing of being able to feel like the subtlety of that energy inside, right?
right,
The difficulty of it was all the health anxiety that came with, and trying to just let all of that turmoil get out of the body. But luckily Reiki was there, right? Reiki was a practice that has always been there. I'm sure it's resonating with a lot of our listeners here that it's a practice we've always had. So I made the decision to kind of, break the chains to my teaching career and become a different type of a teacher. I went back to the practices that I've always been, working with, and started to study in earnest, and really dive into Reiki full on. In Hong Kong, I was very fortunate to be one of the city's first Reiki healers working at a traditional Chinese medicine clinic.
wow,
Um, and so that was kind of like a kind of like a trial by fire, right? I mean, I'm sitting there in a city where everybody knows, or is the language is of qi. Like Chinese
right,
medicine is about qi, right? People move energy. They drink herbal tea all day long. They walk on stones to massage their meridians. Like they get this. And so here comes this Westerner who's going to work at a Chinese clinic and be this Reiki healer. And yeah, it was a difficult interview process, but I made it through, and it was a beautiful career, and I'm very happy. I'll be back there actually in a month, at the end of January 2023, to be alongside the doctors and working with energy and being in that space, and it allowed the teacher hat to really flourish as well, because I got to see an entire side of Reiki, that might have been pretty difficult to access, right? To be honest, from the
right,
West. And then that was further complemented by going to Japan and going to the roots. And like you mentioned at the beginning, my most recent teacher is Hakutan Inamoto of Komyo Reikido in Kyoto. So I've spent numbers of journeys up to see him, and time just with him working on the practice and working on deepening the roots and letting go of the attachments and the story, and really just building my connection to myself, really, right? Which is Reiki. So, that's kind of the abbreviated journey. And now here I am talking with you and post Reiki Ray Summit, and here we are.
Well, I'm always amazed. I love hearing people's stories because it's interesting. I think when we are on our journeys, they feel so very personal to us. But I mean, the gift really is that, and everything that you've experienced. Now, as having this conversation, we all get to learn through the
Mm,
experience that seemed to be so much your own. I mean, even just from what you just shared, I'm like, oh, I have to ask him this. I have to ask him this. So there's a couple of questions that just came up. One with that sensitivity and your relationship to body, because I think, just how we've been conditioned in a lot of ways to not pay attention to ourselves. A lot of people may have sensitivity to energy and just be either annoyed or afraid of it because they don't quite understand the relationship, but they don't give the time and attention to understand it.
mm,
So you had this awareness of this relationship to body, paying attention to how the body was talking to you, but then that element of mind that came in. So when you started thinking about like, oh, being worried about health and this and that, because of even what you were sensing, can you talk a little bit about how you nurture that relationship between mind and body? And did you start to recognize, the importance of like, oh, well, now I have to focus on what my stories are and how that is also impacting the body, which all in a lot of ways points to Reiki, right? What we learn
right.
in the practices. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. And it made me smile when you said that, like, to recognize all my stories because I've
Mhm.
got a lot of stories. um, and I know we all do, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the I don't really know how to answer that beyond, of course, anything that's just on my personal journey. And
Right.
I think what that personal journey has has allowed me to understand was, if I take the health complications that I've been through, that's kind of akin to like climbing a mountain, or walking through the fire or whatever. It's not
Okay.
easy. um, but then arriving on the other side of it, in many ways it's the polar opposite, but it's still not easy, right? Because then I feel like here I am now faced with the task, the infinitely difficult task of letting go of my stories,
Yeah.
right? And we find comfort in the attachment. I mean, we are dualistic, but we're beings of form, right? I mean, we have a body that is dense, right? We live in a world of duality, night and day, male and female. I mean, it's all it is duality. So how do we try to cultivate peace, non-dualistic peace? Well, that's, to me, that's even in some ways more difficult than walking through the attachments,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I'm laughing at that, because it's like, well, I don't even know if this is probably just going to make it even more confusing. I don't know, but you know what I mean? It's
No,
like you get
I
on the other
think it,
side and it's unwind. Yeah.
yeah, but it's so relatable because I mean, I think, that's one of the biggest challenges for all of us. Like we have this, and especially when we come into these practices, whether it be meditation, Reiki, other systems that people may practice, we do all of a sudden become hyper aware of our bodies and our thought forms and of how we are emotionally. We just become so aware of ourselves. And at times that can be a bit overwhelming and even
Mhm.
annoying, but it makes us really aware of our stories too. And there is that challenge of like, wow, like, yeah, I'm attached to this or that. um but one of the things I think is interesting in observing it all is looking back at the proof, right? So I'm sure like even in that journey that you went through with your journey to wellness at that time, like if you look back hindsight, you probably recognize like there were certain points of like, oh, when I did use my breath or when I did focus on meditation, these things that made my body feel like I was allowing healing to happen, right? So it's almost like we get these these clues that point to, even though it's difficult to let go, here's the benefit or the effect of it. You know,
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, but it's really interesting. And now you're on the other side and still having to work through the layers. Yeah, I don't know. It's just
Yeah,
interesting to me.
I think I think a good way to put it is that I'm on the other side of potentially one mountain,
Right.
only to recognize that the the mountain range just continues
Continues. Yes.
forever, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't know, like, is that a daunting thing? I mean, yeah, when I was younger, like, teenagers don't want to recognize the mountain. Like, who cares? There's more
Right.
important things, bigger fish to fry at the time. Like, and for people who, at some point, we all face it. At some point, we all climb that. And I like what you said. Like, if we look back on our journey, we can see the little hints or the little like breadcrumbs that our
Right.
future self is leaving for us to keep our path kind of not consistent, because we can take breaks whenever we want, but
Right.
to at least remind us that the path is always there and it's up to us to walk it, but there's no way to get off of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. And now this is a little kind of left field, but I'm just curious because you mentioned this too. So, um, somewhere in your journey, you also had the study of astronomy. And
Hmm.
I don't know, when you said that, it just reminded me again of like body and our relationship to universe, our relationship to non-duality and just one with all there is. I wonder if your study and understanding of astronomy and even everything that you may have taught prior, do you see how that even somehow points to or overlaps with some of these teachings that we consider to be more esoteric or spiritual or however we label them?
Absolutely. One thing that I'm always kind of finding comfort in, and when there's a starry sky, I look up and it feels like home because we're from the stars.
Yes.
Right? I mean, literally the iron that is in your blood, and every literal thing that we have contact with on the earth was at one point formed or manipulated by the byproducts of the death of a star, right? So to me, that's really beautiful because we've just been recycled endlessly through this entire universe, right?
Yeah.
Now, the astronomer in me, that I have a background in, I've got a degree in it and stuff. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that because in the metaphysical space, there's quite often a lot of discussion about quantum physics.
Right.
And I don't understand quantum physics. So it's a very difficult topic. So I'm sensitive to put that out there. But the quantum state is very interesting because it suggests that we can be two things at the same time,
Right.
like a zero or a one, right? Like in a binary quantum state.
Binary. Right.
Um, this would suggest that we could also be form and formless, like a wave, like a photon of light is both a particle and a wave, right? So it both has a form, but that form has nothing in it, like it has no mass, right? So there's this really beautiful, precarious line between duality. It's like, metaphysically speaking, to me, it's like the line that is the central point between yin and yang. It's like
Hmm.
the balance. It's like the idea of the moment. I mean, there's a lot of abstract things I'm saying here, but it's like that very precise balance between yin and yang where everything is perfectly stable. It's
Yeah.
like a photon or a wave, right? It can be either one depending on a circumstance, right? And so I think all of that is, it's very beautiful, and it really has I mean, it's got, I think, more than we can talk about in one podcast, but
Yeah.
it's got so much beauty and a profound space to help us settle, I think, into our Reiki practice, to surrender into it.
Yes, you remind me of the whole idea of non-duality and of itself. I mean, it can send us through this rabbit hole of endless thought and possibility and question. And, of course, when we do certain practices and in, meditations, it's like sometimes we get a glimpse or a hint or where you just feel like you had at least a moment of just that, like nothing and all things at once. But it also makes me appreciate the realm of duality in some way, because I always think of it as like it's this extreme uh space of being able to learn about the polarity or learn about, one end of the spectrum to the next. Like we really get to immerse in those opposing everything, even
Mhm.
of our own nature. But then the beauty of trying to understand, well, how does it all find its middle way? How does it all really come together? Where is that zero point where there really is no difference and there is no duality? It's fascinating. I won't say any more because me and you would go down an entire rabbit hole, I know, and we'd go away
We would.
from what we
I
want to
think we
talk
would
about
indeed.
today. Yes, we would. But I do want to ask you about one more thing you mentioned before we go on, to talk about more about Reiki and the journey that is coming up. When you were speaking about working in Hong Kong and practicing Reiki, and even in that culture, there being some understanding of Qi, and the practices may have some similarities, but also some differences. I just wonder, in that experience, did you have an opportunity to learn about um, those specific teachings as it comes to energy medicine or even our functionality? And again, seeing where it may have mirrored with Reiki, or did it just help you understand Reiki in a more expanded way?
Yeah, I think that the biggest kind of eye opener for me was, I mean, like I was familiar. I've been kind of exposed to Chinese medicine even in the States. I've got friends that are qigong instructors and Chinese medicine practitioners and stuff. I kind of grew up with them and things like that, but it was never part of like my sphere of
Right.
influence. Really, it was always kind of a satellite influence to me, but it was familiar anyways. But when I started to be surrounded by that and actually employed in that sphere directly in the center of it, then it was quite clear quite quickly how the conversation was the exact same thing, right? Like you can use the needles or the cupping or the herbs or the all of the different treatments that we have in, or that Chinese doctors have, and TCM or traditional Chinese medicine doctors, anyways, practitioners employ to facilitate the movement of qi, right? Reiki is a very similar idea, at least to me. When we place our hands on the body, or when we get still enough that we can just become aware of a part of the body with our mind, then in many ways we're doing a similar function as are the needles or
Mhm.
something in Chinese medicine. We're working to perhaps isolate and or become aware of resistance in the body. That might be a trauma, it might be a belief, it might be a physical pain, whatever it is. If we streamline down the body to get to that thing and then let it soften, let the muscle release, or let the trauma, the memory dissipate, let our attachment to the past go, then that resistance will alleviate itself. And once it alleviates, then that meridian can be opened up, right? It can flow as it's supposed to. And when I started to see it like this and then practice, with the kind of the overlay of the meridian system and like the Chinese medicine teaching and stuff, those things, because of my body sensitivity, those really became clear as day to me. Like I could practice Reiki and I didn't know these things, Yolanda. Like I'm not trained in Chinese medicine. And I would go to the doctors and I would say, in my practice last night, I could feel like all these points, and I would point to them on my body, and they're like, that's literally the gallbladder meridian or whatever. It exists. And this is how people mapped it out, thousands of years ago. Like
Right.
people just go into practice and experiment and take the data that comes back. And that's how we figured it out. Right.
Isn't that
So
fascinating? Gosh,
it's
yeah.
incredible. It's incredible. And so they really did overlay themselves really beautifully to see, because I think Reiki can be talked about in many ways so esoterically and so mysteriously, or
Mhm.
uh, metaphorically, even, right? Like it's just something that we just place our hands. And in the West, there's a lot of doing, there's a lot of belief about I'm going to heal this and move that and open all these things and whatever. And that's all the mind. And if the mind is busy, then we can't actually practice Reiki, right?
Right.
So like in acupuncture, you're in a very relaxed, hopefully, environment. You're on a nice heated table, you're in a dimly lit room, you've got needles that don't hurt, or they shouldn't really anyways,
Right.
and it's deeply relaxing. Your mind, if anybody's had acupuncture, you know what I'm saying, your mind is usually quiet.
Yes.
And when it's quiet, then that meridian can flow because you're not attached to the story that's trapping the meridian and keeping it closed, right?
Yeah.
So
It's
yeah.
two things, like, as you say this, because I'm very visual, so in my mind, it's like I'm seeing your words become a documentary of energy medicine where people could literally see this and really hone in and get it. But I really love to, and I think this is why I love these conversations and even studying different philosophies and practices, because I think about when there was a time, and I mean, we still do it now, but it seems like maybe it was more acceptable at a time to explore possibility and write it down, and it can become what we understand is true through our direct experience. Whereas
Hmm.
now there's more of like this hard line of like, well, if it's proven by science, then we can accept it as true. But it seemed to be, there must have, at that time, anything that you personally recognized or realized, that is what became understood as, well, yes, it's true. I mean, this is what we're experiencing, this is what we're noticing. And it's fascinating that even all of these years later, we're circling back to trying to have this, like, basic, so to speak, understanding of our functionality and our
Hmm.
overall wellness.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to me. But I think that's what's happening too. Even in having a conversation with you before, and um, having some some contact with your work, it excites me that people are still exploring in that open-mindedness as it comes to Reiki. Because even to your point, like in the a lot of the Western understanding, what's been passed down, and even now with social media, so many different ideas and thoughts come up around what the technique is, what it isn't, what, just all of the things that we can get lost in it. But it seems like in these recent years, it's coming back around to highlighting what you recognize in your direct experience. That's even beyond the book, and coming back to focus on mind, coming back to
Mm.
relationship with mind and body. It's a beautiful thing. So from when you first learned till where you are now, are there any significant changes or shifts that you've recognized that stand out in terms of your understanding of working with energy or the practice?
Indeed. And I would think that I view my journey with Reiki and I view my journey with learning Reiki. Obviously, it's something that is ongoing, right?
Right.
We reach the first apex only to then learn we didn't really learn anything at all. So we have
Right.
to climb it
Yeah.
again and reach a slightly higher peak, and we keep going and going. So I look back at my practice with Reiki, very much the same as somebody growing up, right? So when I first was exposed to Reiki, like I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, I put my hands on my knees and it just felt good and it was cool. Like I was like, hey, I'm 5, who cares? Like, so
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. And it was just kind of exciting and new, right? And then I learned Reiki. Like I took my first class in 2000 and whatever it was, 6 or whatever. And that was me kind of being like the teenager. Like, hey, this thing that I just learned like 5 minutes ago, I can now use it to solve all the world's problems and I'm a master of it. Okay,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
sweet. But come back tomorrow when you find out that that maybe not, maybe just slow down a little bit. And I had to learn that and I had to, keep studying. And I had clients when I was, when I started to move away from teaching, and I was still in kind of the late teenage years of my education. In that I was still, there was a lot of belief, right? And I look back, and that's really beautiful. I'm not saying this to be condescending to the journey. I
Right.
hope that people can maybe echo what I'm saying here on their own journey, because indeed this is how we learn literally everything, right?
Right.
We get a first glimpse and we think we've mastered it, and then we get humbled and then we finally learn it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And what was humbling to me was the all of the attachment that I had and the belief that I had and the feelings that I had that was really front and focused, when I was starting off with my practice, when I had clients and everything. And that I think helped me to really dive further into releasing my health anxiety and overcoming those health issues, because it brought so much up to the surface
Mm,
that I had to face because I was attached,
yeah,
right? And once I started to release the attachments, then it was like, wow, what I thought I understood or what I thought I knew about Reiki just became infinitely more broad and infinitely more open and infinitely more aimless, if that
right.
makes sense.
Yes.
And that's really beautiful. That doesn't mean that I've grown or like I've made some depth in my practice. It just means that I'm a little bit further down the road,
Yeah.
right?
And that's one of those things that I find exciting about it too, is that you don't know how you're going to understand it from, one day to the next. So it always feels like this never ending just experience that continues to expand. But I mean, you can't predict how. And even in the very subtle ways, a lot of ways that we can't necessarily articulate, not even that you'd even really want to, but just
Mm,
the awe of what you recognize that you get to experience as you go along on the path. I mean, it's mind blowing to me. So this kind of ties right back into this journey that you and Inamoto Sensei will be hosting in Japan, in
mm.
this seeking of or searching for the legacy of Yusui Sensei, because again, for so many reasons we could say of, why things were not fully presented to us here in the West when Reiki was first taught, and then over time, just the way things change in understanding or the passing down of stories and a lot being lost. So, in this journey, what is it that you all will help people to reconnect with or start to come into awareness of as it comes to the legacy of Yusui Sensei?
I think I've mentioned it like this, and I think it resonated, so I'll use it again. It's imagine, growing up Catholic, for instance,
Hmm.
and then having the opportunity to go to the Vatican, right? Or to go to
Right.
like Jerusalem and to be like to go to the Serpent Mountain to see like all of these things that it's like, oh my God, I've read about this, I've prayed to it, I've studied it forever, and now I'm there.
Yeah.
Like it's giving me chills to say that
Yes.
because it it brings all of the things into a focus, as it were, right? So why is it that Usui Sensei went to Mount Kurama to do his fast, his 21-day fast? Why did he fast for 21 days? There's significance to all those things that are maybe a little bit more obvious than what I'm going to be teaching about him when we're there in Japan. But when you're actually there and you hear it and you can see it, then it's like, oh my, that's incredible. Like it makes so much more sense because I'm literally right there at that moment. And that's what I mean about the kind of title of this, of the looking for the legacy of Usui Sensei. Why did he do those things? Like I'll go back to what I was saying quickly about my journey as a Reiki practitioner. That teenager like discovery, like friction, right? Of like, I discovered it, you didn't, but you did, but you didn't, that like kind of friction. He
Yeah.
was going through much the same idea. I don't want to, put words or stories over what his journey was because I obviously wasn't there living it. But I'm saying this and paraphrasing it because his 21-day fast was to deepen his practice because he was reaching these blocks. He couldn't
Right.
figure out how to become a deeper practitioner, a deeper monk, deeper and more connected to Pure Land Buddhism and stuff like that. And the fast even mirrored that, as it's rumored, right? It's discussed that even at the 21-day mark, nothing had happened. And then it was like that friction came up, and it's like, well, forget it, then I'm done. And then the great Reiki came, right at the last. And isn't it always the case? Like right when we're about, it's always darkest before dawn, right? Right when we're about
Right.
to give up, we get our thing. Um, and so when we're there and when we're at Usugi Gongen, where he sat for 21 days, or rumor has it, and when we're in the old Meiji Emperor capital of Japan, which is Kyoto, and we're surrounded by all that history and all the Buddhist influence and the Pure Land Buddhist influence in particular, we can start to see the roots of the practice. And then everything hopefully will gel and solidify into a very understandable and accessible narrative, right? I think it's not that I think, I mean, of course, this is how things work. It's as you get further away from the source, it's just like, what is it, that telephone game,
Telephone,
right?
yes.
Yeah. So the further away you get from the first person who's saying the message, the more and more and more it gets diluted and twisted and whatever. And now, okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but when we look at Reiki lineage, for instance, one of the, kind of the difficulties in it is the further away your lineage is, it's just that every one of those forks on the lineage is an opportunity for the teachings to have been changed
Right.
or manipulated, not manipulated, that's got a negative connotation, but just, modified or taught in a different way or whatever. There's nothing wrong with those things except for the idea of attachment
Mhm.
and belief, right? And so we can end up like the telephone game with a very different story than what we started with. Reiki, as it at its roots, is a practice, a very simple practice. No, it's not. It's a simple practice in theory of just letting go, just placing your hands and letting go. Letting go is the difficult part,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I have to ask you this because there are some people that are so drawn into this type of thing just because they may be, more inclined to just want to simply know the history. Like some
Mhm.
people just love to know the backstory and this and that. But I've spoken over the years to, not a lot, just a handful of people who actually had the opportunity to go to Japan and go to Kyoto and all of these things. And each of them have a different story of how it changed them in some way, changed them in their understanding of themselves, of their practice, of Reiki, all the different layers. They all had a different experience and expression of that. So I was just curious of what even drew you to your first time taking this pilgrimage of sorts, and then does anything stand out as significant that may have impacted you for people just wondering like, well, and then what? I learn about it, the history, but what does it
Right.
really do for me type of thing? Yeah.
Right.
What was your
My
experience?
my story with that, my experience was it's quite an interesting one. I saw Inamoto Sensei on a YouTube video a long time ago with Phyllis Furamoto, right, the granddaughter of Takata Sensei,
Got it.
and they were giving it's a beautiful talk, but there was one bit in the middle of it that really it was just kind of like, wow, I hope I can do something with. There was like an influential moment. I remember that it was kind of one of those moments where everything kind of froze or whatever. I didn't know what to make of it. And true story, it was my birthday, and my wife, we were in Hong Kong, and my wife gave me a surprise trip. I had no idea where we were going. I got on the airplane. I was trying to figure out, like, I didn't want to know where the plane was going. I was trying to go as long as I possibly could without knowing where we were going. I made it all the way until the flight attendant said, it's a 4-hour flight to Kyoto, right? I was
Oh,
like, oh my God,
wow.
we're going to Kyoto. That's amazing. And then immediately my mind was like, I should try to see if I can contact Inamoto Sensei. And I didn't know him. He didn't know me. I sent him an email. And luckily, we did get in contact. He invited me to the Reiki share at Komyo Reiki Do. And I'm saying all of this because of your question of like, how did it change? Like, what did it do
Right.
for me? And I'll never forget this. It was as if it was like my luggage that I brought to Kyoto was my Reiki practice, right? It was like I was bringing all of this weight with me and all my beliefs and all that, like my background and my story and my suffering and my health journey and all that type of stuff. All of that was temporarily put aside at Komyo Reiki Do when we did the Reiju. Okay, so it's it's God, it gives me I'm sorry, it gives me chills. It was this moment that was really transformative for me because here I was coming in thinking like, oh, the attunements are sacred, like we can only do those after level 1, 2, and 3, but here they are doing attunement every week. Like, what's going on? And he said, bow your head in gashao. So I bowed my head in gashao. I didn't know what was going on. And then I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. Everybody in the room was bowing their head in gashao. And then only some predetermined, I think it was just, week by week, it doesn't matter who does it, but a pre-selected group of Xi'an's teachers would get up into the front of the room, and then they would go around and they would perform the Reiju on individual people. So you can imagine a room of maybe 50 people, there's probably 6 Xi'ans, right?
Wow.
And this is why, to me, like I'm smiling because I'm like, wow, it was such a little boy. I was so funny in that moment. I bowed my head, and every bit of ego in me was like, I hope Inamoto Sensei does my attunement. It's embarrassing to say it. It's embarrassing to say it. And then I realized in that moment that I was like, wow, if my head is bowed and I don't know who's doing the attunement, then that means I have to let go of even that idea that somebody is better than somebody else, because that's
Right.
just all my belief and my ego and my attachment. And there was that analogy of the baggage that I was bringing in that moment, that moment, maybe 5 seconds or whatever. It was like that baggage just evaporated,
Yes.
and I was just still, and I was like, oh my God, it's so much easier and deeper. And then my baggage probably came back. So, you know, as it does. And I've been working to lighten that load ever since. And I think that's the most difficult bit, is constantly trying to lighten that load of attachment.
Mhm.
But for me,
That well,
that was the game changer for sure.
well, that's the amazing thing of what we were talking about just a little bit ago. And I saying like those little moments of evidence that we have that remind us, even if they're just, I mean, they seem to happen so quickly, but they're so deeply impactful and they change us in a way that, again, I mean, like, how do you even quantify or articulate how, but you know that it did. And so even when you move forward and you find yourself attached to a story and this and that, it's like if that awareness, if that memory comes back, and then it's almost like you recognize the reason of why it would benefit me to let go of this story, because
Mm,
I had that one glimpse, that one moment of complete surrender and how it felt and what it taught me. And that's one of the things I'm so fascinated about too, because we do often get obsessed with knowing. Like, give me all the information, let me read all the books, let me be able to say and sound like even I know it all. But then you have these experiences, no book, no nothing. It's just
right.
you and your head bowed and gasho. And you have one of the most profound lessons in like a matter of seconds. That's what's fascinating to me
Yeah.
about this work and this journey. Like, gosh, it's so phenomenal.
It's
So
incredible, huh?
yeah, it's really incredible. And but it reminds me of, now that I'm saying this, that importance again of presence and awareness, those types of things, because we would miss it. And a lot of times when we say these things of like, oh, okay, in our practice we have to be, present, we have to be in our awareness, we have to be non-attached, all of those things can sound, I don't know, not even just daunting, just kind of like, what? I don't get it. Why? And even
Right. Right.
unconsciously, we're attached to our way of being because we're like, I mean, I'm fine. I mean, I'm here. I don't know what you're talking about. That you have a precious moment like that, that really just, God, it just amplifies why, even within the system of Reiki, what is it pointing to for me and why? And if I
Mm,
can trust enough to try to surrender to that, no, no one can guarantee me or tell me exactly what it's going to look like and what I'm going to attain, or if I'm going to become a baby Buddha. Like, no one can tell me. But can I just be open enough to see what it's pointing to and why I've even felt called to this in the first place?
right.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. I feel like as your heart keeps opening on your journey, so to speak, like, yes, as a 5-year-old little boy and your hands on your knees and this curiosity, but as you have continued to practice over time, do you ever think or feel or just know like why you continue on this path, or like what it is it's really doing for you at a soul level, so to speak? Like, do you ever consider like, well, what keeps me in this? What is it? What is this relationship that you've become so entwined with?
I don't know how to answer that succinctly, because yes, there's a there's a lot of things that it's brought up to me.
Yeah.
Um, I'll I could say it like this, like that. moment that I was referring to and that you were, very beautifully articulating on there in that moment of stillness where it's like if it happened even just once, right?
Right.
Here's kind of an example of the types of thoughts that come up. I was told this in Japan when I was studying there. And it didn't make sense at the time, but I think now it makes a lot more sense. The seated Buddha is not anything but the perfect form of Yolanda or Bruce or everybody else on the planet, right? When you stare at a statue, and I think this is very interesting, like when we look at a crucified Christ, for instance, we
Hmm.
say that's Jesus Christ. No, that's you, right? We need to see ourselves because we are the energy of the universe. We are the energy of all things. So we are Christ. In Buddhism, it's a little bit more like, no, that seated Buddha is you. It's the perfect version of you. So, you know, I'm very conscious that when we talk about these things of non-duality and all that type of stuff, I know that there's a lot of people who might hear that and be like, man, I don't even know. I don't even know what that is. So I'm not even going to start. The way I talk about it is like this. It doesn't matter if you don't know what it is. You have to just keep practicing, just keep working, just keep going because you've already obtained it, right? Because like when you feel it for the first time, and maybe you can recognize that you are that seated Buddha in that one moment, time and space don't exist. Nothing exists, right? So when you are frustrated and all of that stuff and practices are not going well, just like they'd happen for me, and I'm sure they happen for you. Some days it's just not a good day to practice, right?
Hmm.
Other days it's easier. But when it's not going easy and all that type of stuff, or life is difficult, somewhere on your timeline is you seated in your perfect awareness. And you're doing that right now. You're literally doing that right now because when you recognize it, nothing else exists. So that means you're always in that perfect seated awareness. We just have to come back to it. And that's why I'm saying that coming back to it bit,
Yeah.
that's the bit where I don't know how to answer that succinctly because there's a million different things. I mean, it's gone all the way down the rabbit hole of I'm now believing that everybody that the entire universe, everybody that I interact with is my teacher, right? Every bit of the external world is a reflection of what I have to work on internally. And that's not an egotistical statement. I think that's the same for everybody, right?
Yes.
And I view that as like now with increasing levels of gratitude and thanks for everybody, hopefully, that I meet. And if I had a bad situation just yesterday. I got angry at somebody. There was a transaction that I was a bit, I didn't think was going correctly or whatever. And I caught myself and I was like, hold on, this is an opportunity for me to catch myself in a feeling of, anger or frustration or whatever. This person is my teacher to show me what I need to continue to, because why would I get angry at this thing? It's
Right.
meaningless, doesn't make any difference at all. Right. And so if I see the world like everybody's my teacher, and I'm like literally like in the center and everybody's around me like helping and helping, then it's so much gratitude and love and thanks to pour out to everybody for taking the time to help me. Like why would anybody take the time to help me? Like it's
Yeah.
such a beautiful thing that everybody is doing, and that's what we all do to everybody. You know what I mean? And that's why
I do.
I could give a million examples of that. And like, again, those little breadcrumbs that come in meditation or encouragement to like get back on the horse and keep practicing and keep going because you're doing a great job. All those little things.
It
It's
reminds me so much of one of the biggest lessons for me in this work was my choice in how I perceive things, and even my choice in story. And again, if I want to attach to this is how I see it, and this is how I feel, and this, versus like really reminding myself, or if I'm not attached to this and I see it in a higher way. So to say, to your point, if someone's really pushing my buttons or a situation really is, if I recognize the person before me as my teacher, of course I'm going to soften and have a deep compassion rather than being angry and frustrated in these things. And that is, again, I don't know. It seems like when we say it out loud, it just doesn't quite convey the impact
mm,
of the effect of it, but it's those things. I think about the practice that we know as Reiki, and again, like you said at first, I thought too, I was like, lay my hands, and I was trying to force this energy out of my hands, and I was like that's what I thought it was about. And then continuing along and, just having a different awareness, understanding, on and on and on. But then starting to recognize the way that along the journey, how things kept evolving in such a way that then it started to change the nature of my mind and how I see, but that was part of every part of my life. It wasn't
Mm,
just in session or if I'm, practicing in gasho and da da da. Like those encounters in life. And I have to tell you really quickly, I won't say the story, but one of the most challenging encounters. It wasn't a person in real life. It was on social media, and it was like when everything was erupting here in the United States a few years ago.
mm,
And one of the most disturbing, upsetting, I can't even describe it any. Ooh, it was hard. And I remember my initial reaction was like, what we would just assume would be the natural reaction to that. And I had this moment, this quick moment of thinking, wait a minute, if what I'm practicing is supposed to help me to be non-attached and to recognize one and to do, I can't judge this person in the way that I am right now. I have to see this in it, but I can't. Like I'm angry and I'm all kinds of things. And so I
right.
sat. I was sat in a meditation. I was literally like just questioning how is this possible? How can you really have compassion and all these things, right? And to the point where like tears were coming out of my eyes. And I don't think I ever asked with more sincerity to understand. And it was just like you said, it was a blip. I mean, I don't know. It could have been 2 seconds, but there was this moment where I felt it in my entire body, just this complete, like, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like complete non-attachment, love and compassion for this person.
Mm,
Just all of these things, but in a blip of a second. And when I felt that, all I could do still was just cry. And
mhm.
then as you say, like afterwards, and I'm like, well, yeah, but but I still feel like, here comes my attachments back again. But
Right,
that 1 second of experience, I'll never forget it. And it just shows me what's possible. That was what helped me understand, like, God, this is what, if I can just be diligent in my practice,
right,
the refinement, it's possible because I got just the 2 seconds of it. It's okay.
right,
Yeah.
right.
So it's so encouraging.
Can I
Anyway,
add to that really quickly? Because I
yeah,
think that's such a beautiful way to put it because it's, like where I was saying, like, I feel like I'm in the center and everybody's around, right?
right.
So is it that person that was, being a bigot or being whatever they might have been?
Yeah.
Or was it that person helping you see resistance inside of you, right?
100%.
And
Yes.
it's so beautiful when we look at because if we looked at the world like that, right,
Mhm.
then you start to see things in a different way. You start to see like, okay, so there's the war in Ukraine, for instance, right now,
Yeah.
right? But what are people doing? Like what if we drop all of the story, then what are people doing? People are warriors, for instance, to face their biggest fears
Right.
as well, right? And this is like classic ninjutsu training. It's like Yoda and Luke Skywalker, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
the whole thing. You've got to face yourself. Everything that we have on this planet, or rather, I should say it like this planet is an opportunity for us to literally experience anything we want, right? So, like, whatever it is you want to experience and try to heal from, if we frame it in the way that you just so beautifully put it, like, yeah, you're getting attacked. Or what if we build up our own strength inside of compassion and strength and fortitude so that that attack fades? Because isn't that how it always is, right?
Yes.
As soon as you rise above, well, then where's the attacker? They're gone.
Yeah.
And then it's
And
like, thank you so much. You just made me
yes.
better. You made me stronger. It's incredible. It's
Yeah, it
incredible.
was,
But
but it's so funny to me because one of the things you said, it was so key and it was true. In that moment where I was like sincerely asking, that was what immediately came up, was my own fear, my own anger, my own judgment, my own, all the things that I would have judged them for. my own version of that is what came into my awareness. Like, well, look,
Hmm.
you're judging them and you're da da da. I was like, oh my God. But it was just even having, it was like so humbling in that moment to accept that my way of judgment and like not trying to validate my own judgment and
Right.
criticism and these types of things, and really owning that it was no different than what I was seeing. That was true. Oh, yeah, but it all happened like in a blip of a second, and it
Right.
was phenomenal. But the one thing that you also just said was we have to face ourselves. And that is, again, one of those things that sounds like, okay, Bruce, whatever, face myself.
Yeah.
I know me. Yeah. But it's like, it's such a gift. And I think a lot of times, when we talk about healing and these things and what we may encounter, it may sound like, why on earth would I do that to myself? Why would I put, but it, it is just so amazing what it is we start to recognize and
Right.
realize in these little fragments of experience and time. So I want to come back to this trip to Kyoto.
Mm.
Just for a second, what just came to mind. Can you imagine, like, Yusui Sensei did whatever he did for his reasons, and then this practice has has sustained over 100 years now, and here we are talking about this and the impact on us in such a, it just, Bruce, we need to
It's
have like a
incredible.
10-day, yeah,
I
just
know.
like a 10-day
I know.
conversation
I
because,
know. I know. There's literally a million
yeah,
things that you
a
and I could
million
easily
things.
talk about. I love it. I love it.
It's just like such a beautiful thing. Again, it reminds me of at the beginning when I said, like, I'm excited to hear about your journey because although it may have seemed so personal to you at the time, look at what we're all learning from it, even in this moment. And the same with Yusui, no matter what his intention was, and even if he had the hope for it to, change the world as he did, it's still, can you imagine that it really, the impact that it's having in the conversations that we're having
Yeah, of
now? And
course.
now you're having this opportunity where people, even from wherever, the whole world, if they choose to come, they can come back to the roots of it all.
Right.
So, can you share a little bit about? I just got chilled. Can you share a little bit about? You mentioned going to Mount Karama, but can you share a little bit more about what people will get an opportunity to experience and the lectures that you'll be sharing
Sure.
while you're there?
Sure. So, the week long experience will be led by myself and joined with Inamoto Sensei, of course. And that in and of itself, to be able to learn and be in his presence is phenomenal. But on top of that, I'll be leading trips to Mount Kurama, of course, to Usugi Gongen. At Usugi Gongen, that's the site where Usui Sensei had his 21-day experience, his fast, and his enlightenment. It's where Reiki is purported to have come from. On Mount Kurama, both Inamoto Sensei and myself will be leading attunements there and Reiki talks. We'll be giving tours of the mountain. And that's beautiful because we'll be able to then see what these roots actually are.
Mm.
Because when you start to understand it and you see like the religious iconography and the temples and so on, it's the mountain itself is not about Reiki. The first time I went there, it hit me when I was at the gate. I was like, oh my God, this is the mountain. Like it just it's like this beautiful little experience. I just stumbled on a mountain and then I recognized it was. And the monk at the gate, I'll remember it's so funny. The monk at the gate, he was like, Reiki. What it oh yeah, I think there was like that's like healing, right? And I was like, yeah, that's like Usui Sensei. Do you know who that is? He's like, I think some people come here for that. I don't know. It's just like that's awesome. And I love that because it speaks to the whole, it's almost like if you're here just because you think this is about Reiki, you're missing the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I loved about it. And you'll see that on the mountain, like when we're teaching about, again, the iconography. If it's focused on, well, I'm in Reiki, and so I need to know about Usui Sensei, then you can't find the symbols in the iconography where they actually came from because you'll miss the point.
Right.
You know what I mean? You'll be looking
Yes.
for the grand picture when the detail is in the micro view, right? It's at the roots.
Right.
So we'll be there. We're going 2 trips to Mount Kurama, and it's a big mountain, right? I mean, so there's temples everywhere. It's an incredible place. Also, I'll be leading a trip to Mount Hiei, which is adjacent to Mount Kurama. Mount Hiei is the birthplace of, or the epicenter of, Japanese Pure Land Buddhism. And there is an insane story here. I'll try to make it really brief because I think it's worth stating. The marathon monks of Mount Hiei. It's a practice that is sadly waning now, but the mountain itself is about 60 miles in circumference. Okay, so that's about 80 kilometers or whatever. It might be quick maths. Maybe it's 120 kilometers or whatever. I can't do that very quickly. But what they would set out to do is run around it 1,000 times. 1,000 times. So 60,000 miles. That's about 3 times the circumference of the earth, right? These guys would run around the mountain, and they would have to accomplish that. I believe it was in 3 years, right? So you can imagine having to run around the earth once a year. It's insane. They would do this, and if they, at any point, if they couldn't complete the journey, they would kill themselves. So
Wow.
if they're running around and they'd break their leg or whatever, they would kill themselves. Okay, that sounds really, wow, that's insane or whatever. It's a practice of non-attachment, right? I'm not attached to the body, I'm attached to the journey, right? So this is going to help me on my journey or whatever. So if you can accomplish that, that's incredible. Then they go on these insane fasts, right? Where they don't eat or drink for a crazy amount of time, and they don't sleep as well. I think it's 7 days of no sleep and constantly reciting a mantra. And they do this to get as close as they can to death, right? And they say that they face themselves. They face every aspect of themselves, and they come back after that journey. There's documentaries on this on YouTube and stuff. Everybody can watch it if you just search for the marathon monks of Mount Hiei. It's incredible. But they come back with such an acute awareness of the moment in life that they'll say things like, I can hear the incense drop off an incense stick on the other side of the temple.
Wow.
It's insane. So we're going to go there and see that history and see that practice and that devotion, right? I mean, sadly, it's not that well practiced anymore, but it is still there. There's definitely still plenty of monks in residence on both of these mountains and study and everything. On top of all that, we'll have time in and around Kyoto. We will be at Komyo Reikido, right, which is the organization that Inamoto Sensei has set up for that Reiki share practice with all the Shions who will join us on that particular practice in Kyoto. You'll sit that Reiju that I was talking about earlier, right, for that moment. So anybody who's listening, and if you end up being there, try not to remember this while you're there so you can feel what I was talking about. So again, just in immersing ourselves in the history of Kyoto, all of the temples, all of the history, everything in Japan, and indeed, I think it's even personified in Kyoto, is a meditative practice. So the temples and the cleanliness and the order and the food and everything in life is a focus on the thing, right? So the flowers are arranged in a certain way, right? Everything is like, that's what I'm focusing on because I'm trying to be present for that thing. And if people are listening from the West, or if you've never been to Japan, that in and of itself is incredibly impactful to our practice. Just seeing that attention to our practice. So on top of all that, there'll be teaching. So I'm going to be teaching a 3-hour course on the idea or the discussion of non-duality and how it shapes or takes away shape from our Reiki practice, and how we can start to incorporate that and feel it and understand it, even if you've never experienced it, right? If we can we have to learn to unlearn, right? Otherwise, we don't know what we're doing. So the whole point of that is going to be recognizing the kind of the way of letting go in our practice. And Inamoto Sensei will be leading a 3-hour talk on the legacy of Usui Sensei, his roots, his background, his connection to Mount Kurama, because who better on the planet, literally, to speak about that than him, right? I mean, he's what, two teachers removed? Is it two or three? That's two teachers removed from Usui Sensei, and he's right from the lineage, and it's incredible. So we're going to have that entire week just basking in that practice. It's going to be I mean, it sounds kind of a bit hyperbole and stuff, but it is. It's going to be a once in a lifetime experience for our Reiki practice, right? And I'm asked this quite often: is there going to be another trip? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I hope so. I hope it's every year. But getting time for both Inamoto Sensei and myself to be able to offer this has taken a lot of work, right, and taken a lot of scheduling. So I can't promise that we will have this again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an incredible opportunity. I mean, obviously, again, I think anyone who's able to go, like, what a gift. And I'm sure, just like what we've discussed, it will, be life changing in so many ways, and
Indeed,
probably ways that people wouldn't assume it would be, especially as you say, if we're going with the intent of just thinking it's about Reiki, but rather being open to just what the experience is overall and the
indeed,
roots of it all. But then for those who can't attend, hopefully you will come back to the podcast after and share with us again what this journey was like. And perhaps, if there is another that ends up being planned in the future, we can
indeed,
hear more about that from you as well. But
indeed.
this journey is set for May 1st through May 7th, 2023. And
That's right.
registration is already open for this. So could you share with everyone? And there's early bird pricing, right?
That's right.
So could you
That's right.
share with everyone how long early bird pricing will last and where they can go to register for the trip?
Yep. So early bird pricing is open until January 31st or until the trip sells out. So the trip is capped at 30 people, right?
Mhm.
And that's to ensure that it is going to be a small enough group that everybody will get the most benefit out of it as possible. So early bird is open until either one of those are met, January 31st, 2023, or until it sells out at 30 people. And they'll provide a link where everybody can go, but you can just go to my site, rootsoflife.org. And then there's a link there that says retreats. If you click on that, you'll see the Kyoto pilgrimage right there for everybody. And on that page, you'll see the pricing, you'll see the details, all of the it still is a loose itinerary. The things that I've said are going to be covered. I just don't have them set by the day because it's
Right.
obviously dependent on weather and Inamoto Sensei and myself and how everybody's doing and all that. But that is all going to be a minimum of what we do, right? All of the refund and cancellation policies and all of the information is on that page as well. So everything you would want to see or want to know about the trip is there. And another thing that I'll be doing with the trip is creating, when the trip draws closer, creating a private Facebook group for everybody who is going on the trip. Now, obviously, this is going to facilitate communication and all this, but one of the big aims for that group is to really help take down the price of accommodation
Mm.
because the traditional old style homes in Kyoto can very comfortably sleep, 6 or 8 people.
Right.
And if people are happy to be in, and I mean very comfortably, you're in, 1 or 2 rooms and 4 futons on the ground, but you're very, very comfortable. The
Right.
floors are heated. It's incredible. So if people are happy to do that, then you could feasibly work your lodging price down to about 20 to 40 US dollars per person per night. So very,
Wow.
very cheap. And, there's a breakdown of rough costs. But if, people are listening in the States, for instance, I would say that Kyoto is nowhere near as expensive as the West Coast or the East and is more akin to the prices. And I want to be cautious because things in the States are super expensive right
Oh,
now.
goodness.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
that could be a
crazy.
whole nother podcast.
Right. Right.
But
So
still, I mean,
I
if
would say
you,
it's cheaper than anywhere in the US, right? You can
yeah,
get, let's say it like this, you can get a really nice mid-range meal where you will definitely leave feeling like, wow, that was awesome, whatever food you want,
yeah.
sushi or udon or whatever it might be, for probably 12 US dollars.
Wow. Yeah,
which is probably cheaper than Chili's, like getting a salad at Chili's or
it's
whatever
cheaper than
people eat,
everything
don't
here,
you?
okay?
Yeah.
It's cheaper than a
It's
pack
probably
of
cheaper
bubble
than
gum at this
Chipotle.
point. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. No, but really, truly it is at this point. That's very
Yeah.
true. So this does, I mean, this sounds phenomenal and what a beautiful opportunity. And definitely want everyone to write that down, rootsoflife.org, and then click on the retreats tab and you can
Yeah.
get all of the information. Of course, I'll have that down in the show description. But before we go, I also want to share about how people can work with you online because you also have courses available and people can learn directly from you as well. All of that is on rootsoflife.org. But could
Right.
you share a little bit about what you offer in terms of teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying earlier in the podcast, my kind of main archetype is a teacher.
Yes.
And of course, one of the guiding precepts of Reiki is just for today, I will do my work honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a teacher and wanting to, always to the best of my ability, follow these precepts, I've developed my courses at rootsoflife.org, which for Reiki in particular, it's Shoden, Okudan, and Shimpuden, the level 1, 2, and master. They're very in depth. They're very thorough, but this is the feedback I get anyways, that they're very easily assimilated and digestible. I get a lot of feedback from my students about how I'm able to bring in a logical or a scientific discussion on the practice because everybody needs to have a different approach to their own learning, right? I mean, again, my career was like standing in front of 30 teenagers trying to
Yes.
teach them economics or like what black holes are. So I kind of had to have as many different ways as possible to keep their attention on me as opposed to TikTok. So,
Yeah.
so it was always a bit difficult, right?
You're
So
like our very own Reiki Neil deGrasse.
I
Just had a
don't know about
vision
that.
of. No, I know, but I was like, oh, wait a minute. Yes, okay, yes. So it
So
is the yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead,
so I
please.
hope that comes out in my courses, and indeed that's the feedback that I get, which I'm obviously very grateful for. So anybody who signs up for my courses, I have two different options. They're either self-paced or guided. The self-paced options and the guided option, it's all the same content, to be clear. The guided option just allows the student and myself to come together live
Okay.
for, live one-on-one calls, which are spread throughout the course. And then that gives the opportunity to really have a conversation much akin to what we've had here, right?
Right.
An opportunity to explore tangents and side questions and other avenues. And I work with a lot of people who are yogis, for instance, because I'm a yoga teacher or I'm a meditation teacher as well. I teach a number of different other modalities. And quite often people want to understand how is it that I can incorporate Reiki into my yoga practice? Or how can I use meditation to help, facilitate shamanic journeys or psychedelic journeys or whatever? So I
Right.
teach and practice all of those things as well. Stitching all of those together, again, is part of that kind of teacher hat that I wear. And all of the things that I offer on rootsoflife.org are things that I'm very passionate about, right? So I'm a psychedelic plant therapist, right? But I do journeys myself all the time. I'm a breathwork teacher, but I practice breathing all the time. I meditate all the time. It's part of doing our work honestly,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, that's what I bring across. That's what I'm trying to offer, and yeah, I just love it because that's my main archetype is to teach and to share that with everybody else. And it makes me think again that it's like if everybody's looking at me because you guys are the actual teachers, then this is the least that I can do is like kind of give back, So I hope that I'm giving back with every bit of love and authenticity and confidence and depth of knowledge in the courses that I can and that I've accumulated with my teachers and on my own journey, because those things have been given to me with the same level of compassion and care and trust. And I hope that I can pass that along, not from the perspective of you just learn this from me because I know all of this stuff,
Right.
but hopefully from the point that my students become as confident and comfortable with it as I am, so that there is no chain, so that it's just a continual flow of information, right? So there's no forks in the road.
Yes.
That's
I
my
do.
goal. And yeah, that's what I aim to do at rootsoflife.org.
Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, really, Bruce, I think that even from how, wonderfully you've shared just about your story and everything today, we get a sense of how impactful, without question, your classes would be and how easy to understand. I mean, you explain everything so beautifully, and it is very digestible just in having conversation with you. So, anyone listening, if you want to learn more about Bruce and his work, as well as if you would like to register for the journey to Japan, to Kyoto in May, go to rootsoflife.org and you can find all the information there. I'm going to make a personal request that one day you decide to study
Physics.
quantum physics, yes, because I was thinking, I don't know why, when you said about lineage, it just highlighted for me how interesting that we also have lineage that is um, not physical or biological, right?
Right.
And
Right.
just like this energetic lineage. Anyway, my mind just went in 20 different directions with like Ruju and oneness and lineage. And from this lens, I'm like, okay, so Bruce, if you could go ahead and study quantum physics and, break down for us quantum entanglement and how this could all relate to this. Yeah, just
Boom, I'll do my best.
a little request from one of your teachers. No,
I'll do my best.
please, please. Yes. But I absolutely hope that you will come back again, just to have a conversation in general about this work because there was a lot that we didn't get to cover. But also after the trip, would love to have you back and hear about what that experience was like for
It
everyone
would
who
it
was
would be a
able to
pleasure.
attend.
Absolutely. It would be
Yeah.
my pleasure.
So thank you for having or making the time to come and have another discussion with me. I really enjoyed the one that we had during the summit. And for everyone watching, again, go to rootsoflife.org, get acquainted with Bruce Taylor, and all of the links are in the show description. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay, beautiful alchemist. Just like I said, the conversation with Bruce was absolutely fascinating. And I want to thank Bruce personally again for coming, making the time to have this discussion with all of us here on Reiki Radio. And if you are interested in taking that trip to Japan, to Kyoto in May, you can learn more on Bruce's website, which is rootsoflife.org. Of course, that website, the link is down in the show description. But again, that is rootsoflife.org. And you can learn more about the trip to Japan, but you can also learn more about Bruce's offerings, his online classes, his Reiki classes, and so on. And then I just want to remind you as well, especially because as we come into the new year, a lot of people, a lot of us start thinking about what our future plans will be, what it is we want to explore next, what we want to learn. All of these things start to come to the surface. So if you are interested in taking any of my online classes, be sure to go to my website, theenergeticalchemist.com. There are several different classes there, from intuition, Reiki tools for practitioners of Reiki. There's a spiritual business development, ancestral healing, just you have options. And those are classes that you can start right away once you register. Or if you still want to join Alchemy of the Oracle, we just began that course last week. And so you have until the end of this month, the end of December, to register if you would like to join. And it's because I have to get your Oracle box out to you. So if you've been thinking about that, this is your final chance to join us in Alchemy of the Oracle. And I would love to see you, to work with you in this live event. And aside from that, I just want to wish you a very happy new year. Thank you for joining me for season 9 of Reiki Radio. I look forward to what it is we will learn and explore together in the year ahead. Yeah, that's really it. If you have any questions for me ever, anything you want to share, be sure to email me. You can contact me through my website. Don't forget to check out Bruce's work. All of the links for everything is down in the show description. And remember to always journey in love.